Yo, what's good, YouTube? What's good? Stormybman, and I am back. That's right, I am back on a Monday, believe it or not. But this is a little something that I had to get off my chest, man. I've been having this subject on my mind for a little while, especially with a lot of the conversation that has gone down recently with the Three Wise Men of Boxing show. And I wanted to come out here and just kind of give a little bit of a take on how I see some of the history of the sport. So as we talk about these things, this show this evening is I'm calling My 5 Supermen of Boxing. Okay, this doesn't mean that they're the best ever or whatever, but to define them, these fighters, to define these fighters for who they were and what they meant to the sport. This is a subject that I came up with. The fighters that you see pictured here are the 5. And just considering who has been selected, there are names in the sport who have meant a tremendous deal to the sport. I want to welcome everybody that's out there in the chat. We got everybody out there. We see Renee Box Young, GG, Marta Machine, Philip Carl Roberts, Underground Asylum, Joseph Selbu, Drew Titan, Lost D Punch Out TV, Michael James 616, Mark Wunderlich. I want to welcome you all to my 5 Supermen of Boxing. These fighters, when we call them Supermen, the Merriam-Webster dictionary defines a Superman as a superior man that, according to Nietzsche, has learned to forego fleeting pleasures and attain happiness and dominance throughout the exercise of creative power. The second definition being a person of extraordinary or superhuman power or achievements. Since we are not talking about power necessarily as it reflects with men, we will focus on the achievement aspect of these supermen. These guys, at one point or another in their careers, displayed extraordinary will, determination, heart, courage, and all had the audacity to go into the ring, what we call that square jungle, and put on displays of machismo that best represent the sport. So as we talk about these supermen of the sport of boxing, bear in mind that this is not an exclusion of anyone in particular that you may know through the sport. But these are 5 guys I've set my eyes upon who defined all of those aspects of being a superman, thus a super fighter in the sport of boxing. We got Lawrence Williams out there has joined us, Curtis Anderson, my brother out there, and the Jab Jamboree has joined us, and I want to say special shout to the Jab Jamboree, Ak Reacher. My brother had me on his show yesterday, and we had a wonderful boxing talk. Thank you again, Ak Reacher, for inviting me to your platform, brother. I appreciate that opportunity, man. We had great conversation. So, my 5 Supermen, in no particular order. We have Joe Louis, the Brown Bomber. We have Sugar Ray Robinson, Mr. Pound for Pound himself. Pound for Pound was named for Sugar Ray's feats in the ring, and anyone outside of the heavyweights and who had stupendous ability, Ray Robinson was the man during that time and has stood as such since that time for all that he accomplished. We have Salvador Sanchez, he whose life was cut short. He died at the age of 23. An amazing fighter out of Mexico. We have Sugar Ray Leonard. He of the Golden Smile, and if you're old enough to remember, the Mr. Feeling 7-Up man, Ray Leonard, Ray Charles Leonard. And lastly, the man and self-proclaimed the greatest of all time, Muhammad Ali. Why did I select these men as my 5 Supermen of boxing? They all have a link that connects them. In each one of these amazing fighters, you will find the exact same virtues, ethics, when it comes down to the boxing. Guys who put it on the line and believed in their championship medal, sport remembers them for. One of the other things that I like to acknowledge in talking about these great fighters is the fact that during the time that they put their wares on display, they stood out. Each and every single one of these men, when they fought, audiences came out, they supported, they paid that ticket price to see these men do exactly what they were capable of doing, and that was entertaining to the top and the max of the sport. You know, I can't, it's almost like there's so much to say, and I am not going to try to give legendary commentary on this. This is something that I have selected for myself. But just as my brother Curtis Anderson has put in the chat, Sugar Ray Robinson won 91 fights in a row from 1943 to 1951. Is that a super accomplishment or what, fellas? You know, just think about it. But this is exactly what I'm talking about. Because when you talk about fighters who were able to accomplish something as such, you have to part the seas, so to speak, and give consideration and favor to what they did in the ring. Sugar Ray Robinson, his record kind of fluctuates between one and a couple of different matches in total, but the record I have on hand at the moment is 174 wins, 19 losses, 6 draws. He lost 1 fight by KO, and he had 109 KOs himself. You know, Ray Robinson when he fought, he gave so much energy to the sport. So much energy. Most people don't even acknowledge what he accomplished, you know. But with fights during his career where he fought Randy Turpin, you know, guys like Bobo Olsen, you know, Gene Fullmer, Carmen Basilio, you know, fighters that were names in the sport. And one thing about Ray Robinson was he wasn't afraid to rematch someone. When he dropped a decision, he'd run it back. When he knocked a guy out, he'd run it back. He was a true fighter in the sport. And with the way that he carried himself, the way that he could electrify a crowd with the combination, his movement, and his dignity that he walked with. He had strong character, strong principles, but the man could fight. Sugar Ray Robinson had all the tools. He could knock you out with the left. He could knock you out with the right. You know what I'm saying? He had a very good chin. Guys like Jake LaMotta, you know, taking on these killers and fighting men more than once. Rocky Graciano. Fighters who were avoiding the guys in Black Murderers Row. Sugar Ray was that type of fighter that you get in the ring with him and win, lose, or draw, which most guys were turned away when they challenged Sugar Ray, most. You gain something of respect being in the ring with a fighter. It was a pleasure to share the ring with such a high-profile personality in the sport. Why hasn't there been a penultimate movie about Sugar Ray Robinson? I don't know. But he's more than deserving of it for what he accomplished. And some of the best fights he had, there's no film of when he was at welterweight. But we do have some film on him, and the film that we have, it shows him being a guy who was as smooth as butter, smooth as silk, and being able to accomplish things. You know, it was the kind of thing that when you paid to see it, let's put it like this, people. If you liked a sport like the NBA in the 90s, and you know the Chicago Bulls, I'm here in the Chi, I can use them as an example, but when they were in their heyday and at their best, and Michael Jordan ran the show here, you know, people would pay that ticket price to see Michael Jordan, the air show they used to call it many years ago, before he got the championship team around him. They would call it the air show. I'm going to see the air show. Well, in his time and his era of boxing, Sugar Ray Robinson was the air show of boxing. And there are recorded knockouts where he just totally crumpled a man with a single shot, where he looked like he killed others. And there were combinations where you saw him hit people and their mouthpieces go flying in the air, you know. But it was all masterfully done and crafted by his ability to just be smooth. Great technique, great movement. And a lot of times you could see him, he was defensively sound, didn't take a lot of punishment. He took shots, yeah, you know, he gave just as he got. But he was a complete fighter. And this was the type of thing that, as he went on in his career, the respect for him, it gained momentum. And the Sugar Man, during his era, was a Superman of the sport. It's that kind of thing that you have to pay homage to. When these fighters put on their trunks, put on their gloves, and they go out there and they bow before the audience and they wave their fist in the air when they're introduced, and when that robe comes off and they meet that opponent in the center of the ring, they're instantly on stage like a musician in a concert, a virtuoso, you know. But it was very entertaining. There are so many fights that you could go, and now we have the luxury of, you know, we've got like YouTube and Vimeo and all of these other ways that you can go and watch historical situations in the fight game. Go and do it. Please do yourself a favor and just go and check these fighters out that we're talking about this evening. Because if you even have, if you never followed them, you have to know that they made their mark for a reason. And even though people think what they're looking at today is great, sometimes you can discover greatness just by reviewing history. Okay, it's very important that you don't forget and you learn what greatness really is, so you can better critically look at what may be proclaimed as greatness currently. Fighters like Ray Robinson don't come around very often. Okay, maybe once in a lifetime. And I have to say, not maybe, but actually once in a lifetime, because there has been no one like Sugar Ray Robinson since Sugar Ray Robinson. There are fighters who people like to try to put up in that place and space, but I'm sorry, as you just saw those stats that Kurt Anderson ran off in the chat there, it's like there's no one around today, or even in the past 25 to 30 years, doing anything like that. And to leave the sport with its faculties. You know? That's important. Sugar Ray Robinson died in April of 1989. He was 67 years old. But he still attended fights. He talked to people. He gave interviews. But he was a classy fighter. A classy fighter. One of my Supermen, 5 Supermen of boxing. Another fighter that I would like to mention here that career overlapped the great Sugar Ray Robinson, and that would be the Brown Bomber, Joe Louis. Joe Barrow Lewis. You know, this man, many years after Jack Johnson. You know, Jack Johnson was a terror to boxing and the heavyweight division, because not only was he good, and he was brash, bold, he loved to roam the town with white women and things like that during a time when that was totally and utterly despised, and people would get lynched and murdered over this. But Jack Johnson didn't care. And when his career ended in the ring, they decided, like, hey, we're not going to let another one of those guys be the baddest man on the planet, you know? So finally, when Joe Louis got his opportunity, he was coached up, you know, how to behave, how to represent, carry himself and everything. And from his first fight, which was 6-round knockout of Jack Kraken, to the end of his career, where unfortunately he was stopped in the 8th round by Rocky Marciano. Joe Louis represented himself, his nation, his race, with dignity, respect. Joe was heavyweight champion for 12 years. with a record of 66-3 with 52 KOs, and he was stopped twice himself. Joe was the quintessential heavyweight who had short punches, powerful punches with either hand, and his nickname, the Brown Bomber, initially was not thought of as something complimentary, but it was very fitting, because just as people would remember in a more modern era how Mike Tyson took opponents apart or whatever, Joe Louis did it with style, technique, and class. He didn't gloat. He didn't showboat. He walked to a neutral corner after putting his foes down, after knocking them out. He slipped his robe on, waved to the crowd, and head on out of town. But Joe was an exciting fighter, and he had his troubles with certain fighters. He was in named fights, the Billy Kahns, the Buddy Bears, the Jersey Joe Walcotts, you know what I'm saying? Ezra Charles. These fighters, Max Schmeling, fighters who meant something during the time that he faced off against them. Joe was the kind of fighter who was very short on words, but he was effective with his actions in the ring. There are people who just don't remember what he meant to the nation. And when he lost to Max Schmeling, he felt like he was not the heavyweight champion of the world until he defeated Schmeling in a rematch. And what a rematch that turned out to be. When Joe Louis lost his first fight to Max Schmeling, we're talking about June 19th, 1936. It was a 12th round KO. Schmeling came into the fight supported by Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime, which they sold and represented hate at that time in the world. That wasn't necessarily Max Schmeling's cup of tea, but they used him as propaganda because Max Schmeling was a good fighter at that time, and Schmeling was known for saying, going into the fight with Joe Louis, that he sees something. And when the fight took place, Schmeling took advantage of a physical defect that Joe Louis had. After falling as a small kid out of a treehouse, Joe suffered a broken clavicle in his left side. And so when he would jab, he would often drop that left hand low after jabbing. But he would lean in, and lean to the side with his head off center line. And his hands were quick. His left hook was awesome. But Schmeling felt like if he could time Louis when he drops that jab and come over it with his own right hand, he might have something going there. He didn't speak of these things openly before the fight, but during the fight, you could see Schmeling working those angles and landing solid, heavy right hands on Joe. And sure enough, in the fateful 12th, that's when Schmeling got home. Joe had taken enough of those shots and he went out. And it was a defeat that kind of humbled Joe, not from the sense of like, oh, I lost, but he knew he could do better. And he always kept that loss in his mind. And because Joe was so well loved, especially by the black community, and there were a number of Americans who respected his ability in the ring as well, but they wouldn't give him full credit. So when he came back and he was able to have a rematch, with Max Schmeling, Joe figured he couldn't call himself champ until he knocked Schmeling out. Got his pound of flesh, got his revenge. And I'll tell you something. When Joe was asked prior to the fight in his dressing room how long the fight would go, Joe held up one finger, indicating 1 round. He was totally dialed in. He was totally focused as a Superman in the ring. He wanted to get Schmeling back. The rest is history, people. Schmeling never heard the bell to end the first round. He was totally brutalized, beaten halfway to paralysis with Joe, because Joe stuffed punches into his body, damaging his spine, damaging his jaw, because when he knocked him out, when he hit him on the chin, it looked like Schmeling's jaw wavered, like if you saw something in a Bugs Bunny cartoon or something. The man was totally anesthetized. People ringside could hear him scream when Joe punched him in the body. The thing about Joe Louis was he was a dangerous man in the boxing ring. Like I said, he could punch with leverage, and he didn't need much distance. We're talking about 6 to 8 inch punches that Joe could get off and totally break a man up. He was fast in his youth, very fast, and he threw great combinations. He could put those punches together like nobody's business. He could stop punches coming from him. Joe would catch the punches with his mitts, you know, and counter and fire in combinations. And you never saw him hardly draw back or anything. They were all from the shoulder and the waist, just turning into his shots. Leverage. Joe is considered one of the greatest heavyweights of all time because he fought like a champion, even when he was challenging, before becoming a champ. And then after becoming a champ, he fought with dignity and carried and represented very well. This is the type of fighter that, because of his accomplishments in the ring, the men that he fought, the men that he rematched, you have to give him credit for being a Superman in the sport of boxing. What a fighter Joe Louis was. And when he passed away at the age of 66 in 1981, a lot of fans were upset that the government had imposed tax problems on him and everything like that. But Joe Louis still had the respect of the people, even if the government didn't respect the man. But he'll be forever remembered for his reign in the division, how he carried himself, and how he fought. The Brown Bomber was an excellent fighter. A lot of people have him very high on their, best ever list of heavyweights. Whether he's number 1, he's usually in the top 4. Someone who would put him in 5 would be foolish. But Joe Louis was every bit that. If you want to watch film on a great heavyweight, Joe Louis is definitely one that you may want to consider looking at. Another Superman of boxing that I have here for you guys is none other than Salvador Sanchez. Salvador Sanchez was a fighter out of Mexico. He had a short life as far as the sport and as far as living. He died at the age of 23, so we never even got to see the very best of Salvador Sanchez, alias Chava. With a record of 44-1-1 with 32 KOs, Salvador, at the height of 5'6", had long arms and long legs. He had a short torso, but he was very much an active fighter, had his own style. He could box as good as anyone, but he had this bit of movement defensively where he would dip and bob and weave and lean in forward as he was doing it. And he could come up out of the crouches of his bob or his dip, throwing punches with power. Salvador Sanchez could put punches together. He had a nice reach of 68 inches. Okay, so with that reach, he could actually be standing away from a guy who threw shots at him, and as the guy tried to move away, he could catch him flush as he come out because his arms were long. And when he put his punches together, they usually got tremendous results. I mean, when he knocked out guys like, dude, it's like a who's who. You know, Rosilio Muro, this guy was taking the task. You got Wilfredo Gomez, okay, Azuma Nelson, Juan Laporte. You know, the fact that Salvador could fight like he did, and it looked like he was doing it effortlessly. He had a poker face. He kind of had a pug nose. You know, it was like he's a you know, a guy that looks like he didn't look like a fighter. He just kind of had a nice guy face or something like that. It was like, you know, but Salvador was every bit a champion. If people think that Julio Cesar Chavez was something for his career, Salvador Sanchez, the fact that he passed away so early in life, Chavez was probably able to have the career he had, because had this man been around for Chavez, you may not have heard much from Chavez. The acclaim that he has had due to, you know, having a short career is kind of reminiscent of martial arts star Bruce Lee, who died at the age of 32. You know, these men ironically had the same numbers in their age at the time they left the earth, but they were twisted around. But that's the type of impact. Salvador could fight, man. And as I was remarking to someone earlier, just watching films and tapes of him, he was just smooth. And he had punching power. He didn't look like it. You know what I'm saying? He was another one of those kind of lanky guys. But when he hit people, man, they hurt. And he bust them up or he knock them out. You know? There were a number of fighters who really tried to fight back and exchange with him. You know, I remember when Pat Cowdell fought him. You know, it was a 15-round split decision. But, you know, Salvador could always take it up another notch. He could make fighters miss. He could slip and slide. He could come out on one side of you and bob and dip and be on the other side of you throwing shots. And you wouldn't know where his shots are going to come from, because his agility was that he could come out of the crouches. He could come out of the dips. He can come out of the bobs throwing. And he never telegraphed what he was throwing. It was effortless. And that's what confused guys a lot, because as he got in there with them, it's like, you know, if you imagine if Pernell Whitaker was a power punching fighter, lightweight or whatever, and how he did his little dipsy-do, if he could come out of that and hit a guy and concuss him and then follow up with ass. That's Salvador. That's how he did it. And being a featherweight, you have to know that, you know, those guys, 126 pounds, man, that's awesome power, okay? That's awesome power when you're knocking guys senseless at that weight class. You know, Wilfredo Gomez was one hell of a fighter. But when he got in there with Salvador, it just made him look like, you know, he was just a tough fighter. I mean, the 8th round KO, he really busted Gomez up. Salvador Sanchez should be spoken of more. But I remember when I was young, I was hearing this guy, and then I didn't hear about him anymore. And I later found out that he tragically passed away in a car accident. And then when I saw some fights after that, they were giving tribute to him and everything. But I had to go back and watch fights of his, and I could see his accomplishments in the ring. And it just showed me that this was another one of those fighters. Again, when you start talking about people and nationality and, you know, ethnic background and things like that, sometimes for the sport, people would allow their prejudices to get in the way. But you have to give credit to where credit is due in boxing, because almost every fighter comes from dire straits, you know, hungry upbringings and things like that. So when a fighter is able to make it to championship level and carve out a bit of legacy for himself in the history of his career, you know, there's respect there, because that man made his living with his hands, huh? And that's the kind of thing you have to give respect to. Fighters such as Salvador Sanchez, they just don't get the credit that they're supposed to get for being great fighters like they were and like he was. So as I was putting together my list, I recalled what type of magic was around him during his career. And it made me think about an acknowledgement aspect. And I wanted to give this man some credit for being one of the true supermen in boxing. At least on my list, he definitely is. Another fighter on my list for these 5 supermen of boxing happens to be another man of sugar, and that is Ray Leonard, Ray Charles Leonard. Sugar Ray Leonard was the type of fighter that he looked like stardust, you know, glitz, you know, razzle dazzle. But let me tell you something about the man they call Sugar. Just like his namesake, Ray Robinson, Sugar Ray Leonard in the ring was a no-nonsense assassin with, you know, victories over guys like Dick Eklund, okay, and Floyd Mayweather Sr., all right, Randy Shields. Sugar Ray Leonard was something else, man. Davey Boy Green, Wilfredo Benitez. He was the type of fighter that, another fighter, you could punch your ticket to go see his fights and you're going to see some action. Sugar Ray would throw combinations as fast as hands that you've ever seen in the sport, and he would grit his teeth and he would sneer as he threw those combinations, as if he was trying to put his fist through his opponent's body. He had the heart of a lion. He was courageous. He was smart, very intelligent in the boxing ring. And he was something to watch when he was in there with other fighters that were at the top class of the sport, because that's when you saw him at his best. He was cunning, okay, calculating, 4-inch reach. Sugar Ray Leonard was definitely the type of fighter that was a boxer, puncher, and he could move. In his early part of his career, when he was at welterweight, he was so quick. Sometimes he could dart off the ropes when a fighter thought that they had him trapped or something, and he would throw the bolo punch, and he would throw this left hook that could knock your head off. Just ask Davey Boy Green. He fought guys like Marvin Hagler, Tommy Hearns, and Roberto Duran, who were also, during his era, made the Fab Four, you know. But Ray Leonard was not a chump. Sometimes people remember him for not fighting certain fighters. So he got a little of that, you know. Oh, he's ducking this guy, Aaron Pryor, Mike McCallum. You know, there were certain fighters that he didn't fight or whatever. But what I realized about Sugar Ray Leonard was he got the maximum out of his career. With only 3 losses on his record, 36-3 with 1 draw, the draw being his rematch against Tommy Hearns, whom he had knocked out earlier when they faced each other, going all the way back to 1981. Ray Leonard could draw the fans. People liked him. He had endorsements during a time that boxers just didn't have that kind of thing going on. The 7-Up commercial that I mentioned earlier with his son, Ray Jr., and it's like, you know, seeing him on TV was like watching Magic Johnson in a Converse gym shoe commercial. And he was a fighter. And I'll tell you something. Sugar Ray Leonard looked great in the ring. His movement, his combinations, the way he was able to evade punches, because when he was young and at welterweight, he was so quick, guys couldn't hardly lay a hand on him. You know, he could move and get around and fire. He got someone in trouble, boy, would he open up on him, throwing these fierce combinations at a person. Always a good guy to look at, Sugar Ray Leonard. It was just the timing with Ali having come to the end of his career, and Sugar Ray Leonard kind of took some of that stardust that Ali had, because he was a gold medalist from the Olympics, and he put it on himself, and he carved out a niche in his own personal career. He did very well financially, but he also did very well in the ring. It wasn't fake with him. His fight with Benitez is a classic. His controversial decision over Hagler is a classic. And most definitely his fights with Tommy Hearns and Roberto Duran are classics. But go back and just watch some of his earlier fights, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. How Ray Leonard was able to take the play away from fighters. In fact, go back, it's out there now. You can check it out. His fight against Floyd Mayweather Sr. For those of you who think that that shoulder roll defense style and everything could be effective against Ray Leonard, check out what he did with Floyd's dad. What an outstanding fighter Sugar Ray Leonard was. And his heart and his courage, his determination was all a part of what we're talking about that made him a Superman. And let's not forget how many times he retired. Sugar Ray Leonard retired multiple times in his career. If I have my count correct, I think he retired 5 times during his career. But when he came back to the ring, he was ready to go. I admire his accomplishments in boxing, and I appreciate that I had a chance to live during the era which his career was thriving. Sugar Ray Leonard was always someone great to watch in boxing. Now, lastly, I would like to get to the man that had his own song, you know, and in his song, he was referred to as the Black Superman. Okay? We're talking about the greatest, self-proclaimed greatest, Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali will go down in history as one of the most entertaining, stellar heavyweight champions, boxing champion that we have ever seen put on the gloves. The man was a walking original, although he borrowed, if that can be believed, from numerous sources. He borrowed from Ray Robinson. He borrowed from the wrestler Gorgeous George. He borrowed from Archie Moore. He borrowed from so many people, but he was able to stake his claim and make it his own. When he would call out the rounds that he'd knock someone out, when he would give poems, that's that Archie Moore there. You know, when he would throw his combinations and shuffle his feet, that was the Ray Robinson, you know. And then when he would get knocked down and get up, that was like Joe Louis, you know. The man was something else. And I'm not here to just talk about that flair or flash. With a record of 56-5, 37 KOs, and he was stopped only once by Larry Holmes. The Louisville Lip was one of the original names that they had given him because he talked so much. But his speech was always entertaining. For some, it was damning. See Joe Frazier. But the man was one of the most colorful, as he referred to himself, fighters of all time. And he made people pay attention to him. He could put butts in the seats. He could put on stupendous feats in the ring. He gave as good as he got. He gave better than what someone put out toward him. And he was beautiful, poetry in motion, all the while that he was doing these things. I mean, Ali fought beasts in the ring when he fought fighters such as Sonny Liston. And don't forget, he rematched Sonny Liston. He fought the likes of Cleveland Williams and Ernie Terrell. He fought guys like Jerry Quarry, who were strong fighters, Joe Frazier, okay? Ali fought George Savallo. I mean, Henry Cooper, Floyd Patterson, Ken Norton. He fought Ken Norton 3 times. And out of those 3 fights, he got 2 decisions. But you could say he lost all 3. But Ali still fought him 3 times. I mean, George Foreman, who during that era and time when he fought George was knocking out everybody, man. And had beaten guys who had given Ali his toughest fights up to that point like they were nobodies. 2-round knockouts. George Foreman beating Joe Frazier down 6 or 7 times, beating him like a baby. Ken Norton down a couple of times in 2 rounds. And George Foreman came up in Sonny Liston's camp. So he was an apple that didn't fall far from the tree as far as thuggery and strength and power and that type of thing. George Foreman brought it. And Ali was able to turn back that challenge. George, being the heavyweight champion at the time that they fought, Ali's title was stripped from him, and he was without his title for, it was like 10 years from when he won the title that he won his title the second time against George Foreman. The Rumble in the Jungle. That cemented Ali's place in history, although there were more great fights to come in his career. But Ali was a great fighter, a Superman, a man who had 3 years taken away from his prime by the U.S. government for his failure to step forward when they called him for draft. And he claimed conscientious objector and decided that he would not fight for this government because, citing his words, ain't no Viet Cong ever called me nigger. And he said he wasn't going 10,000 miles across the world or whatever to fight somebody, another people who were oppressed. That won him a lot of international respect. Regardless what his religious beliefs were, people began to take note that this man was not just a champion of the ring, but he was a champion of humankind. That's a title that nobody's ever been able to take away from him, people. Ali was the true people's champion. When you hear him speak with the convictions, he said that when he won his title back, he wanted to be able to walk down the street with all the poor people and the prostitutes and the drug abusers and everything, and tell these people that they could have hope, that they could have something to aspire for, and that he's fighting for them. He's their champion and everything. When he spoke these things, people believed in him. And he garnered a wall of support that no other champion can say that they've had. Muhammad Ali, as I mentioned earlier, had his own song called Muhammad Ali. And in the song, the lyrics, it says, "The Black Superman." When he was stricken with Parkinson's late in his career, Ali lost a lot of the ability to speak publicly and vociferously and represent in the way that we had known him for so many years. But you know what? Maybe that was okay for one specific reason. He had done so much while he was fighting, and he left a legacy of things that he said that represented his convictions and what he believed in, what he didn't believe in. That it's all on tape. There was no more to say. And when he couldn't fight anymore, we had the tapes. We had the reels. We had all of the press clippings. To see this man accomplish what he did during his career and to be a part of that caravan and that ride it gave you a sense of pride that you could look at and say, you know, that's my champion right there. He fights for me. He fights the cause. You know, Ali was able to rescue a man who was on the verge of committing suicide. He wanted to jump out of a window or something like that, and Ali coaxed the man out of not doing it. Ali went over into the Middle East and brought hostages back when, you know, our world leaders were sticking around and, you know, dragging their heels about trying to get these Americans brought home. Ali was able to go over there and negotiate a deal and bring hostages home. This man was beyond boxing, people. He was beyond boxing. And he was the type of person that you could look up to. And there's not a lot of people in life that you can actually look up to without looking them in the eye. But Ali had a perch just a little higher than a lot of us. See, because of how he lived and how he fought and what he fought for and who he fought for. So when you have someone representing like that, how could that not be a Superman? Huh? How can that not be a Superman? All I want to say is that these fighters that I mentioned tonight, being my 5 Supermen of boxing, each held in their hand a mystical something that made them just a bit better than their contemporaries. There were things in each of their careers that showed their vulnerability and their mortality. But aside from the creator making a final decision on something, mere mortal men had nothing for them. This is Stormybman. This has been my talk on my 5 Supermen of boxing. I hope that you all have enjoyed this hour. Just a little bit of time to give respect and acknowledgement to these fighters and what they did and how they generated the interest in the sport during their careers. Until the next time that we speak, I hope to see everybody again. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please hit the subscribe button. Doesn't cost anything. And we can have more great boxing talk in the future. That's all I have for you all this evening. Thank you for stopping by. Peace to everybody. Have a good night. Enjoy the rest of your week.